Welcome to Confessions of a Parent Coach. I'm Coach, a mother of four, and potty talker, Ann Kaplan. This is the podcast where I confess something from my own parenting and coaching life, teach a lesson around it, and answer your questions. Even we parenting experts are far from perfect, and the real magic happens when we get down with all that imperfection. We get into the gritty side of parenting here, so earbud up and dive in.
Welcome into the podcast, listeners. I'm excited to be here with you again today. And today I'm going to talk about actually a really tangible tool that is super helpful in dealing with kids who, I don't know if any of you have a kid who's kind of like dramatic or hyperbolic, really likes to make mountains out of molehills. And every time you talk to them, it's just like they're catastrophizing all the time. It's not just like, oh, I had a hard day at school today. It was like, school is the worst. I hate it. I'm never going back there again. That kind of thing. This tool, by the way, is useful for all conversations with your kids. But I find it especially handy in interacting with kiddos who are kind of hyperbolic like that. So I'm going to start with my confession as always. So just yesterday, my freshman in high school, we were at her school for parent teacher conferences. And while we were kind of waiting to talk to the teacher, she was just talking to me about this boy that she's been dating, but he's a little bit older than she is. And he is anxious to kind of keep their relationship just to themselves, at least in the beginning, because he thinks that they're going to get made fun of and teased for the fact that there's a couple year age gap. So he's a junior and she's a freshman. And because she is younger than him and he's seen this happen before, he's seen other kids who there's a big age difference, which by the way, I think it's so funny that 2 years is a big age difference. My husband's 7 years older than I am. So I'm like, well, but obviously we did not date in high school. But because he has seen that other people have kind of been given a hard time by the other kids at school, he is reticent to quote unquote go public with their relationship until they know it's a sure thing or whatever. And I'm sitting there listening to my daughter tell me about this, and she's kind of just venting or whatever. And at one point she's like, it's like, if you really cared about me, it wouldn't matter if someone made fun of you. And so the fact that he's not, telling anybody about it means that he cares more about what other people think of him than he does about me. Now, this is my confession for you. I know what I should have done. I'm about to tell you what I should have done because that's the topic for today's episode, but I didn't do what I should have done at first anyway. I was like, well, that's not necessarily what that means. I started arguing with her kind of. I mean, obviously not in a contentious way. We weren't having like this adversarial dynamic, but I was like, well, but come on, like, it seems to me like you're kind of catastrophizing here and making his hesitation mean something about you and how he feels about you. And I was arguing with her. I was trying to convince her that, like, actually this story that you're telling yourself, it's really not true. And there's not a whole lot of compassion here for the fact that this kid has social anxiety and he's anxious about this thing. And I realized kind of, you know how it is, especially if you have older kids, when you're talking to teenagers, you can almost feel the shift in your conversation. Like Gigi physically like shifted a little bit away from me and, kind of rolled her eyes and, just was like, kind of had this attitude of like, never mind, forget it. And I realized right away that I had made the mistake of engaging with her story, trying to change her mind, convince her that that's not really what was going on, and really wasn't paying attention to what's actually happening for my kid, which is her emotions. And that is the tool that I'm going to talk to you about today. My clients hear me say regularly, engage with the emotion, not the story. So, what does that mean? What it means is our brains are constantly interpreting the world around us. We have situations we find ourselves in, and we tell ourselves stories about that situation. And that story is completely our ego. It's not actually our authentic self. you know, it, kids come home from school and say, everybody at school hates me. I have no friends. My teacher is the worst, or they get angry with us and they tell us, no, but no other kids on the planet have to do X, Y, and Z, or it's so unfair that I have to such and such, or you're the worst mom on the planet, or whatever. None of the actual stories that our kids are saying are true. They might have a grain of truth to them, but I mean, sometimes our kids really are telling some stories that, you know, have nothing to do with reality. But that story's not real, and that story's not our actual true, like the true self with the capital T of our kid. It's their ego. It's their protective story. Like it's way better to just say, everyone at school sucks and this school is the worst school ever, than to say something more nuanced that actually puts a little bit of ownership on us. Like, school's really hard for me and I'm not sure how to handle social situations. And it really hurt my feelings when this kid did blah, 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 blah. Right. Instead, it's everyone at this school sucks and this is the worst school and I want to change schools. I'm using a lot of school examples here today, apparently. Um, so so when our kids say this stuff, I want you to imagine like your kid is saying something that's totally not true. Like my daughter said, you know, I guess this basically means that he doesn't care about me as much as he cares about his reputation. When that happens, you have two choices. I want you to imagine your kid is handing you, like putting their hands outstretched. And in one hand is the story that they just told. And in the other hand is their true self, like what is actually going on beneath the surface, the emotion that they're feeling. We get to decide which thing we pick up. Do we pick up the story or do we pick up the emotion? But here's the thing, you can't pick up both. So when we decide to engage with the story, what we're basically doing is kind of colluding with our kids. Your kids saying, I have a lot of emotions. I don't really want to look at them. So I'm just going to tell this story that's like paints me as the victim or as the innocent or whatever. And that will be kind of like this deflection from what's actually going on with me. And if you pick up the story and say, like I did yesterday, and say, well, but maybe that's not true, and argue with them about the story or even believe the story or whatever, now the two of you are almost saying to each other, like your kid's saying, here's this deflection that I'm offering you. And you're saying, okay, cool. Yeah, let's both of us pretend that this is what's really going on here. And we won't look at what the truth is. You can't engage with the story and help your kid through their like emotional turmoil at the same time. Or on the other hand, when imagine once again, two outstretched hands here. One on one hand is the story, on the other hand is what's really going on. If you decide to pick up what's going on, now you actually have this opportunity to go deep and help your kid go deep and maybe move beyond this situation that they're in. But you can only do that if you kind of keep your head on a swivel and not fall for the smoke and mirrors that their ego is offering you. Like what I should have said to my daughter yesterday is, wow, that must feel really bad to think that your boyfriend doesn't really care about you. I'm so sorry you feel that way. And pay attention to the emotion she's expressing, not this wild interpretation that's factually inaccurate. And we have this opportunity all the time and we squander it so often. When our kids come home and say, everyone hates me at school, my teacher is mean, we most of the time our knee-jerk reaction is to say, your teacher's mean, but remember when she did this and this, or what did she do that seems so mean to you? And then try to convince your kid that, well, actually, that wasn't really mean. Or, everyone at school hates you. Well, how could that be? Because we had a play date last weekend and you had 3 friends over and they seem to have a great time, right? Like we're arguing with them, we're engaging with their story. But what's the emotion behind the story? Everyone at school hates me and my teacher is mean. Probably some feelings of loneliness, some isolation. Who knows? Maybe embarrassment. Maybe something happened at school that this kid feels ashamed of. We don't get to know that if we engage with the story. But if we engage with the emotion, we can say to that kiddo, it sounds like you had a really hard day at school. What happened? Or, what makes you say that nobody likes you? Or what makes you say that your teacher is mean? Not because we agree, but because once we get to hear what's actually going on, now we can say, oh, wow, it sounds like you're feeling really lonely. I'm so sorry you feel that way. Or, it sounds like, something happened and you're kind of beating yourself up for it. You see where I'm going with this? We engage with the emotion, not the story. And it becomes even harder when the story is about us, when our kids say things like, this rule is so unfair, you're the worst. No other kids have to. The one that keeps popping into my head lately is when we told our son that he had to pay for his car insurance. Nobody, I don't know anybody, not one kid who has to pay for their car insurance. And he had this whole story about how like we live in this really like well-to-do area, and what we were, putting expectations on our kids that, other wealthy families would never put on their kids. And it's really hard to go to this school because he doesn't have as much money as everybody else. It was a complete story. I mean, I could poke so many holes in this story, it would fall apart in like 30 seconds. And it was very, very hard for me to just sit there and engage with the emotion of like, yeah, this feels really unfair to you. Is it actually unfair? No, but I'm not going to argue with you about whether or not it's fair. I'm going to recognize it. This feels really unfair to you. It feels to you that you're being mistreated. It feels to you that you're different and standing out compared to your peers. That sucks. And I'm happy to sit here and talk to you about that and engage with you about that. I'm not going to debate, all this other stuff, but it's hard. It's hard to do that when our kids, their story is about us, and that story is either not true or it's hurtful. And maybe it does have a little bit of truth to it. All of those things. Right. So let's acknowledge that, sometimes this stuff is easier to do when it's not about us. And as it gets closer and closer and closer to our sort of tender spots or to ourselves, it becomes harder and harder. So give yourself permission to use this skill on the easy stuff first, knowing that like as you get better at it and you start to see how it makes a difference with your kids, you're going to expand that into your own kind of realm. And really pay attention to what's going on inside of you when your kid says something that you're like, that is just not it. Like, it's not true. I hate that you feel this way, and I'm trying to convince you not to, or all those things. Like, that happens. It totally happens, and it totally derails us. And that's what happened between me and my daughter yesterday. Like, I felt like she was kind of turning on this guy and not really giving the relationship a chance, which don't ask me why I care. Like it's just it's just a high school romance, whatever. But in my mind, I was kind of like, don't just throw the baby out with the bathwater here, give this kid a chance kind of thing. And it made me decide that instead of, actually going deep with her in that conversation, I was gonna poke holes in her story. And that was a total waste of time for both of us. And it kind of threatened, it almost, put distance between us. Luckily I was able to recognize it and turn my behavior around. But that's there for all of us for sure. So think about that. Pay attention throughout the day when your kids say stuff. Are you actually engaging with what's behind what they're saying, or that kind of surface smoke and mirrors that their ego is offering you? The more that you engage with your kids' authenticity, the more that you engage with what's behind that smoke and mirrors, the more your child engages with that part of themselves, gets to understand and know themselves, can call themselves out, can explore themselves with curiosity and understand what's going on inside for them, instead of what most of us do, which is kind of paddle around on the surface of ourselves for our whole lives, and not understand how we get into these frustrating situations, not understand how to help ourselves grow beyond a situation, all of those things. So, all of these things that we talk about on the podcast, they're all just really useful ways for us to help our kids step into themselves more deeply, more authentically, to grow beyond where maybe we were able to grow at that time in our lives, or maybe even later in our lives. Like, I have to say that parenting this way, one of the greatest things I see from it is kids who have emotional intelligence that I probably didn't have until I was twice their age. And it is fabulous. And I can definitely say for my older kids, the ones who are like in college or almost in college, like I definitely have moments with them where I'm like, you are so much more mature and evolved than most of the adults I know even. And this is what's available to us if we decide to actually show up with this kind of deeper curiosity, do our own work so that we're not so triggered that we can only engage with the story and defend ourselves when it's the stories about us and stuff like that. This is what's waiting for us. It is fabulous. I have to say, it is very fabulous, especially now that my kids are older. I'm starting to see, how they're growing and how they're showing up and how they're navigating challenges. I definitely probably, once a day even have a moment of going like, oh my God, it's working. It worked, like this is what I was hoping would happen. So those moments are available to us when we decide to do our work, when we decide to do the harder thing, right? To engage with the emotion and not the story. And by the way, this trick works with everybody, not just kids. Try it with your partner or your bestie or a family member, and you'll see what I mean. And if this is feeling like, heck yeah, this is the relationship I want to cultivate with my kids, I could see how this would make a huge difference. And also, I would love to not have to figure this out by myself. Set up that just free discovery call. I cannot wait to meet with you and hear about what specific challenges you are experiencing, for you to share your family's story with me, and for us to talk about where do we want to go with that? What does success look like to you? What changes do you want to see in your family? And let's paint a roadmap of exactly how to get from here to there and see if we're a good fit to walk that roadmap together. I hope you have a great week. I hope you enjoyed this short and sweet little tidbit for you this week on the podcast, and I'll talk to you again next week. Bye, everybody.
The episode is over, but there's more waiting for you. You can grab my free workbook, Getting Kids to Listen the First Time, that walks you through the fundamental principles I teach all of my clients and applies them to this very universal parenting challenge. So if you're sick of repeating yourself all day long or just want to learn more about my style, you'll definitely want to go to bit.ly/kidswholisten. And if you're ready to work with me, let's meet. Set up a free call at bit.ly/Kaplan call, and let's create an action plan that gets you exactly where you want to go. And of course, links to all this goodness are in the show notes. Thanks for joining, and I'll see you next time.